Hello everyone, welcome to the 6th of the Faster Project webinars. Today we're going to be talking about electric vehicle charging infrastructure in the Republic of Ireland. We'll be talking about the history of it, how it's structured, how it's run today, any hurdles that have to be overcome and plans for the future. We've got some brilliant panelists with us today, but before we get fired into that, we'll give you an update on the Faster Project, kindly brought to us by Michael McGrath and Paul MacArtain from Louth County Council, who are involved in the Republic of Ireland section of the Faster Project. So, gentlemen, if you'd like to join us and give us a quick update on what's going on.
Okay, well, all. I'll just give you a kind of a brief background to the project. So the Faster project is the rollout of 73 rapid chargers across Western Scotland, Northern Ireland and the border counties of the Republic of Ireland. So in relation to the Republic of Ireland element of that work, Louth County Council and DKIT are the partners involved in that, and Louth County Council are kind of engaging with and DKIT engaging with the 6 border counties, which is basically 7 now. It's Louth, Meath, Monaghan, Cavan, Leitrim, Sligo and Donegal. So in relation to that, there's 25 rapid chargers to be rolled out across these regions. So at the moment we have at the procurement stage for a design consultant, and we've got the tenders in, so we're just in the process of marking them, and with the view to basically going to tender. It's going to be a 2-stage procurement process, so we'll be going to tender hopefully at the end of this year for the first stage, and then maybe the end of Q1 for the second stage of that.
Superb. Thank you very much for that update. So yeah, things are almost about to be kind of kicking off in terms of hardware specifications coming in, and then hopefully not too long after that, we'll see hardware going in the ground. Conveniently, we're also joined today by ESB Networks, who of course are going to be a key player in getting those hooked up to the grid. So yeah, thank you for that quick update on the timing of things. If anyone has any questions with regards to the Republic of Ireland aspect of the Faster project, we've got the Q&A box. Do make good use of that, and we can direct those to Paul and Michael. But we can now begin the main course, if you wish, of the webinar. So we're going to be, as I said, talking about EV infrastructure in the Republic of Ireland. We've got some fantastic panelists with us today. So from the user perspective, the EV driver perspective, we're joined by Roland Krijnen from Irish EV Owners Association, and we're also joined by Geraldine Herbert, who's the Sunday Independent's motoring editor, both of whom, of course, have plenty of experience with EVs. Yes, that's the point. We do have a chat function as well. So do make good use of that if you're having any difficulties. Oh, there we go. Perfect. Yeah, the chat is officially open. So do make good use of that. And of course, make good use of the Q&A. So that's from the kind of end user perspective, but we've also got some key stakeholders with regards to charging infrastructure itself. So we have Paul Hogan from ESB Ecars, the main charging network in the Republic of Ireland. We have Brian Tapley from ESB Networks, who runs the power grid in the Republic of Ireland. We've got Chris Kelly from EasyGo, one of the first private movers in charging infrastructure within Republic of Ireland. And who else have we got with us today? I think that's just about covered everybody. We have quite a lot of panelists today, trying to make sure I've not missed out anyone. Yeah, I think that's everyone. So if everyone can turn on their cameras and join us, we can begin. But just before we do, we've got a series of polls as always throughout today. So Donald, if you'd like to put up poll number 1, we want to find out who's joining us today. What's your involvement with electric vehicles? So are you just an everyday EV driver? Are you an owner of charging infrastructure or a site host of charging infrastructure? Are you a provider of charging infrastructure? Are you a fleet manager, and so on? So we've got quite a lot of you answering the question at the moment. I'll give you a couple of seconds more to answer that. Looks like a decent mix today of of kind of key stakeholders, if you wish, but also actually, despite the fact that it is during business hours, we've got quite a lot of EV drivers joining us today, end users. So this is going to make for a really interesting discussion in the Q&A and in the chat as well. Let's end that poll and we'll have a quick look at the results there. So yeah, EV drivers make up the biggest number of us, but we also do have some fleet managers, quite a lot of charging infrastructure providers who will no doubt be interested in what the Faster project is up to. So thank you for sharing that with us today. But what I would like to do to begin proceedings is to go back to the very beginning of charging infrastructure when EVs first started to come on the scene in Ireland. So what was the first public charging infrastructure to be installed? Where was it? When was it? Can anyone cast their mind back to the very beginnings of it?
What was it, 2011, I think? Was it in Monaghan? I think one of the first ESB fast chargers to be installed.
Superb. Well, actually, if it was ESB that was doing it, Paul will be the perfect person to answer that one. Paul Hogan, ESB Ecars.
Yeah, thanks for that. So yeah, I suppose the history of Ecars, just looking at kind of where it's come from. When Ecars was founded, I was over in ESB International in the engineering business and watching from afar, looking at the idea of e-mobility becoming a reality. And little did I know, a few years later, I'd find myself working for Ecars. So in February 2010, there was essentially a tripartite agreement established between the Irish government, ESB, and basically 2 or 3 of the major car manufacturers, Renault and Nissan being the 2 main ones, pushing the Zoe and the Leaf to the markets. And it was very much, the first phase was a pilot project. It was an attempt to put as many charge points on the map to achieve a complete spread of charging infrastructure to support those new to market options. And I think at the time, in the first couple of years, I think there was about a charger to a vehicle in most catchment areas, and in many areas, no vehicles to each charger. So that network was built up as a pilot project over kind of the period of 2010 to 2015. 2015, 2016, and then further supplemented in 2015-16 with 10T funding from Europe, which contributed to the deployment of the first fast chargers along main routes in Ireland. So that's really maybe the history of the Ecars network as it is and as it was then.
Presumably that would have been free to use. I understand that Ecars was for a while, and we'll come back to that in a minute. But in terms of the type of infrastructure, if this was 2011, I mean, this predates CCS. The Nissan Leaf was probably and the Mitsubishi i-MiEV were the 2 kind of mainstream electric vehicles available at the time. So what kind of infrastructure was installed in the early days? Was there rapid charging, or was it initially type 2 posts, or even tethered type 1, since that was all that was available at the time on cars, really?
Yeah, so Ecars was more of a project collaborator with a broader European initiative around particularly the establishment of the Open Charge Alliance to look at how they could normalize and standardize charging infrastructure. I wasn't involved in it, but I believe we had something in the order of 30 different types of chargers from 20 different types of manufacturers, standards that no longer exist. So, we all know CCS and CHAdeMO and standard type 2. But there was quite a few experimental options that were considered, and ESB tried pretty much everything over that period of time by way of the Ecars network to, stress test what would work going forward. So it was essentially a pilot project, as you said, free to use. And I'm sure there's probably a few EV drivers on the call here who would have been those early adopters who were making the vision a reality early on and using our network at that stage.
Sounds like some of the original hardware should be in a museum then. Presumably it's been ripped out and replaced as time's gone on, but no, it's interesting to hear about the kind of the origin of the charging network and how it kind of very quickly evolved. But in terms of, from an end user perspective, back in the early 2010s, Geraldine, of course, you are a veteran motoring editor. When was your first use of the public charging network then, and how did you find it?
You see, I was gone for the very early stage. I was on maternity leave at that stage. So I think it was around 2014 when I first did. And I suppose the thing about the network then, it was really, really good because there's so few cars, there was so many chargers. So I wouldn't have had a huge, because I got a home charger installed very early. Nissan did that for all motoring journalists at the time in a bid to try and encourage them to take EVs. So I wouldn't have had a huge amount of experience of it. But as I said, I just remember lots of charging points and literally nobody driving electric cars at the time. So it was all good, where it's, it's quite a different situation now.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. There's a bit more demand for the infrastructure that's there.
Tad, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, Roland, that's a good point. When did you start driving EVs as a senior member of IEVOA? When was your first foray into them?
My first one was a Nissan Leaf. It was actually 2012 demo model, but it was actually I bought it in 2014. So in 2014, got the charge point installed at the house. I was the first employee in the company that actually had an electric car, so I had to lobby a lot to get charge points installed. Now we have about 20 across our sites, so it's definitely helping to drive the adoption in the company by just private users to get charge points installed. But yeah, for me it was 2014 as my first dip into the electric world.
Good work. Yeah. Great to hear about the positive influence you've had on your workplace as well. That's the thing, like obviously the infrastructure, like the original infrastructure predates the overwhelming majority of EV drivers today. So it's interesting having serious hardcore veteran drivers and motoring experts on here today, and everyone's kind of going, yeah, we don't really remember what it was like. I've been driving EVs in Scotland since 2009, but it was 2013 was the first time I used a public charge point. So yeah, it's funny how this early infrastructure was in here, and like the 5 Nissan Leaf owners in the early days had basically could free reign of it. You never had to queue, but obviously that's changed now as demand has just increased exponentially. Before we go on to the next point, which is the evolution of the ESB network to how it is today, we do have a question in from Alan Carolan regarding the FASTA project in the Republic of Ireland. So we'll quickly get Paul and Michael onto that one. Have the locations been confirmed for Republic of Ireland installations for the FASTA project? And is this going to be published where the chargers are planned to be installed? Is that going to be made available to the public?
Well, the locations have been we've gone through an initial site selection. So basically, we were looking at criteria like 24-hour accessibility, local authority owned sites, and then proximity to the 10T network, security, and then you're looking basically at ESB capacity in the area. So we basically at the start had 10 sites in each local authority, and then we done a kind of selection criteria to get down to a point where we have 25 sites across the region, and we're at that point now. But we kind of have done the preliminary design, but now we're engaging a design team now to take it forward. So we have reserve sites as well set aside in case any issue or anything happens with the sites that we have selected. So yes, there is sites selected at this point in time, but that could be subject to change. And them sites kind of have been, they're available, they're on e-tenders, for example. We put out free tenders for the consultant, we would have listed the sites as well in them documents. So it's publicly available information. What I would say is they could be subject to change through the project.
No problem. Thanks for the heads up on that. And now we move on to ESB Ecars as we know it today. So how exactly, well, first of all, we've already covered how it was founded, which is great. Well, obviously the government of Ireland was involved to an extent, I suppose, Paul, would you say, rather than it being ESB's decision in its entirety? Presumably there would have been that governmental push to set up the network.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, it's funny. So it would have started under Minister Eamon Ryan at the time. Was a real spearhead to the concept of e-mobility and promoting it. And I suppose now he's back in a position of relative power. So we're definitely seeing more action in the space, with particularly the establishment now of ZEVI, which is a big positive. We've good understanding of how the benefits have worked in the UK for the establishment of OZEV a number of years back, and the Office of Zero Emissions Vehicles. So ZEVI will be, Ireland's equivalent. So absolutely, the government were pivotal in progressing the establishment of it, and I suppose will be pivotal to the next steps through the establishment of ZEVI and other functions.
Absolutely, yeah. That's a fantastic initiative. Unfortunately, ZEVI is so new they were unable to join us today. They're still setting up, but hopefully we'll get them on for the next webinar that's covering what's going on in the Republic of Ireland. But yeah, in terms of ESB Ecars then, so we've done a previous webinar where we looked at Charge Place Scotland, which is quite a uniquely structured beast. But in terms of ESB, obviously ESB being the major kind of electricity provider and network operator within its different divisions under the banner of ESB. How is ESB Ecars structured? So who owns the charging infrastructure? Who owns the land that infrastructure is on? What kind of arrangements are in place there? And then what fundamentally is ESB Ecars' role within that charging network?
Okay, so look, I'll start by answering probably the easier end of the spectrum in terms of questions there. All of our charging infrastructure is hosted by third parties. So that can be either publicly with agreements with councils or local authorities, for the kind of the curbside or car park type deployments. And the other side of it being privately with the likes of retail parks, forecourt operators, and other such type motorway service areas. So we don't own any of the sites that we have any of our charging infrastructure operated on. So a huge proportion of my work is actually in the working with those hosts to get agreement for either continued operation or upgrade or redevelopment. And they're critical to us being able to actually build and evolve our network. I suppose what's really important to do is to kind of look backwards to look forwards. The establishment of Ecars was a pilot where everybody was trying to figure this industry out, not just in Ireland, but globally. And no one really knew what the right fit or model was. If you looked at the UK, Scotland, even within that context, things were done differently between England and Scotland. So we were no different in that we did things differently. And there was a certain amount of, let's say, structural hangover there that had to be worked through as things have evolved. What's really important to emphasize is that ESB Networks is the distribution network operator, and they do so under license to the Commission of Regulation of Utilities. So their role is very much cordoned off from anything that ESB Ecars does. We're two fundamentally different businesses. So from a practical perspective, ESB Networks, we're a customer of ESB Networks. We apply to them for connections, no different to any other commercial supply request. So when we're looking to put new charge points in or upgrade existing, we are treated as a customer, so much like any of the other CPOs who are either in the market or looking to come into the market. So there's a very clear delineation and boundary between us in terms of how we work. I suppose the current state of play, just to look at where the network is at the moment, the last 3 to 4 years has been quite a busy few years for us in terms of evolving the network structure. And really what that's centered around is step change in the nature of the infrastructure. So in the first instance, cleaning up the AC, the old AC kit that in some cases was not even usable anymore, and taking it out of service. And at the same time, looking to step change as many of those locations that were AC chargers to fast chargers insofar as possible. And then looking at the next level of charging infrastructure in terms of high-powered charging infrastructure deployments. So all of that has been ongoing through what we call the CAF project, or Climate Action Fund supported project, which was essentially a Department of Environment led initiative. In 2018, we applied for funding and secured match funding, so 10 million from ESB, 10 million from government to invest in step change of the infrastructure. And an integral part of that was involving key stakeholder groups like the Irish EV Owners Association in looking at where were the really important areas to make improvement. So we looked at everything from the kind of the reinforcing of the existing network, where we should be targeting new deployments, and the other key component of it was implementing pay to use on the network. So really, I suppose if I was to sum up what we've been doing in the last 3 to 4 years, is going from that old pilot network to a very clearly structured commercial operating business. And now the next step will be taking that and building on it again and increasing the scale and the let's say the volume of what we do and power levels.
Excellent. Thank you very much. You've answered a whole bunch of questions I had lined up for you in one go, so that was very efficient. I suppose that, one of the key things is that the differentiation between ChargePlace Scotland and ESB Ecars as the kind of original national network, if you wish, is that, as you say, you own your own hardware, and then that's hosted by the likes of local authorities. So actually that brings us neatly back to Paul and Michael from Louth County Council. So from a local authority perspective, and also Paul Hogan, ESB Ecars as well, when selecting sites for charging infrastructure from a local authority perspective and an Ecars perspective, what is the process there? And from a local authority perspective, is there a way that local residents or EV drivers can suggest preferred locations where there's clearly a bottleneck on existing infrastructure?
Yeah, I might take this one. We at DKIT, as the college, we were involved in the initial scoping of the site. This project is a little unusual because the EU and public nature of it meant that we couldn't host sites in commercial garages, for example. So all of the sites that we had to be in local authority owned properties or state owned properties. And this has put a restriction on who we could interface with at this stage. Also, the operation of the tender is to install infrastructure, and the operation of the infrastructure then is outside the remit of the tender. It's essentially it's paid for infrastructure by the EU to assist the development of the network. So when we came to selecting the sites, we initially had that constraint that everything had to be in council-owned or publicly available charging sites. Once we did that, I suppose you end up focusing on car parks, you end up focusing on council buildings. And the second constraint then was, well, the second question, are we going to come off a building or an existing grid connection, or are we going to require new grid connections? And of course, the idea of needing potentially up to 25 new grid connections also made us stop a little bit and think, well, how long is that going to take and how much out of the budget is that going to cost? So an iteration of that then, in conjunction with the Special EU Programs body, who are the funding or coordinators, we suggested instead of putting in 25 individual rapid chargers of at least 50 kilowatts. That's within the letter of offer. We suggested that if we put 2 chargers of over 100 kilowatts total capacity onto a single site, would that qualify as 2 chargers? And they came back and said that it was. And this is being mindful of the developments in the industry as well, because while rapid charging is classified as over 50 kilowatts, we're rapidly moving towards the ultra rapids and the very high 150 kilowatt level charge. So with that in mind, then we were able to rationalize the number of sites from numerous sites, 25 across the 6 or 7 counties as we have now, and identify sites which are strategically important on major roadways and routes. Our brief was to complement the 10T network. Paul mentioned the original 10T kind of funding, infrastructure funding. So this isn't necessarily national level funding to deploy infrastructure, it's to complement it, because the Interreg funding is to have its impact in the eligible area of the cross-border territory of the 6 border counties of the Republic of Ireland, the 6 counties of Northern Ireland, which identified areas of Western Scotland. So that put a lot of constraints in the project. It's a specific project for a specific purpose. And I think that then allowed us, I suppose, the latitude to identify rapid chargers. So what we will be looking to put in for the main part is at least 120 kilowatt chargers, 100 to 120 kilowatts, which means that there's a couple of benefits to that, especially with the technology now. We hope that if one vehicle, for example, is connected and it can do so, it can make full availability, take full benefit from a greater than 50 kilowatt charge. So if a vehicle take 80 or 100 kilowatts directly and there's nobody else there, then that vehicle can charge up very rapidly and move on. If someone else turns up, which is often an issue at charge points, currently most of the chargers can't satisfy 2 charges at the same time at the DC level. So we are looking to have the DC split, and then 2 vehicles can charge at 60 kilowatts, or at least 50 kilowatts. In the Republic of Ireland, we didn't add AC charging onto that, although it is available in the ESB network at the moment. We're the next generation along. Our job is rapid charging, so we're aiming at that 50 kilowatts or greater. And again, the aim here is, I'm an EV driver myself as well, and ultimately, this kind of infrastructure is going to be to some extent to get you home. It's not going to be for the full charge. And insofar as that, we had some data from Europe which indicated that the average charge amount is about 20 kilowatt hours. So to that extent, the average charge duration on a rapid charger is 15-20 minutes. So this is convenience level charging. It's not the full 100% because that's not what a rapid charger is for. And that really puts the locations in that context. So we have put them along national primary routes. we've put them in locations where they are in rural areas. It's to try to catalyse or to support the development of EV infrastructure in that, but also, i.e., there's a town, and then you'll also have those towns having a lot of passing traffic. So, and then some of them are in places which we spoke to ESB early days in this, and a lot of it was related to the business case. We're in the position where we don't have to necessarily put them in a location where the business case isn't clear, because of the catalytic impact that it could have in a rural area. So we feel that certainly, if you take the Republic of Ireland context, although ESB Ecars have their own plans for a large rapid charger network, just take Louth here, for example. We have a rapid charger in Monaghan Town on the N2, and then there's pretty much nothing on the rapid sense until you get to Ashburn in South County Meath. So where we come in then is literally in the middle. So we'll be looking to install a rapid charger in the town of RD, which is not yet bypassed, but it may be soon. So, but it's only off the road. Fill up your battery, 20, 30 kilowatt hours, and head on down to your next destination. So that really, I suppose, gives an idea of the kind of constraints that we had. It wasn't a purely business-based project, but we hope that the provision of infrastructure will complement the development of the EVs, I suppose, in the next few years, and just break those barriers down to people taking up the technology.
That's a really comprehensive response. You've hit on some really interesting points there. We will have a couple of polls coming up, which I think will pretty much align with the information that you've provided in terms of charging speeds, in terms of charging duration as well. So yeah, I'll be interested to see the results from those. But I'm aware that we are we've got quite a lot to get through, and we're comparatively pressed for time. So if we have a look now at the network, I understand at the moment for ESB is either app or RFID, isn't it? But there's contactless credit card payment being rolled out as well. Is that correct? Is that also going to be mandatory? Is there EU legislation around that going forwards, Paul?
So I suppose from an ESB perspective, up until now, any of the infrastructure we've been upgrading to doesn't have contactless payment terminals. So the standard payments are by the let's say the established pay-as-you-go and membership RFID card or through the app approach. We have a business in the UK as well, from a charge point operation and investment perspective. We're kind of doing the same thing there, but we're seeing the difference of probably about 2 years of a difference in terms of regulation and policy. In the UK, it's now mandatory above 50 kilowatts for all charge points to have contactless payment. So technologically and system-wise, we're ready for it, and we're able to start looking at it. There is a structured plan coming down the tracks around implementation of contactless payment. I can't give any sort of timelines on that, but it's part of our broader long-term next steps for Ecars in Ireland approach, because quite simply what we've seen is people do like the convenience, particularly the newer EV drivers who maybe only have to use a high powered charge once every few months, and they're just zipping down to go on a staycation or visit the granny, and they just want to pick up a quick charge and don't want to have to go through the process of signing up to a network. So we're conscious of it, and it is going to be part of our development plans going forward.
I presume that'll be music to the ears of Roland and Geraldine from an end user perspective then. How have you found the app/RFID scenario up until now?
Challenging, I guess. We see more and more charge point providers coming online, which is of course fantastic, which is what we need for really driving the adoption, as well as it's kind of like the build it and they'll come. But the big remark that's often being made is, I just want to be able to tap my card or leverage the new capabilities of plug and charge. It's very welcoming to see the progress that we start getting to a point where we can do the tap and go feasibilities, because typically what happens is if you have to sign up to a pay-as-you-go, there's often a minimal amount that's going to be taken off your card. And if you're only going to use the charge point once, effectively you're spending maybe 20 euros, because that's maybe the minimum payment that we would expect, and that's 20 euros gone from your account, which you may not never going to use again because you might not go in that to that location again where the charge point is providing its service, or within the region of it's being providing the service. So it's kind of, I understand from a supplier's perspective, they want to have the security because that's how it best works to do the balance, and some would then kind of pay back whatever you have left. But in a lot of cases, it's basically kind of like a deposit that you're paying, and then they take it from that deposit. And if you go over, they take again the same deposit. And of course, that means that at some point, if we have so many different providers in the country, that you'll have money sitting everywhere that you have to tap into whenever you need to. But for people that are not using this that often, I'm personally someone that doesn't use it that often, but I know I have money sitting in pretty much every provider because I had to use them occasionally, and as a result I had to pay more than what I actually had to use for charging. So I welcome the the regulations that may be coming down the line, but also to see this happening in Ireland, to especially for our members, to see the charge points being tap and go moving forward.
That's actually a really good point. There are some charging networks in Scotland as well where you have to preload a certain amount of credit, and if it's a one-off, then you end up losing that amount of money. I mean, Geraldine, of course, as a motoring editor, you don't necessarily have to be as sympathetic towards EVs. So, what's your brutally honest take on the best way to basically to transact when charging an EV, and what the situation is at the moment? Oh, you're on mute, by the way.
Right. I think the key thing is keeping it as simple as possible. And whatever about current EV drivers, they've learned to put up with this. This is the system, and they've learned to work around it. I think the big problem is when people ask you, they're thinking about buying an EV, and then they say, if I'm going down the country, what do I need to do? And you start to explain all these various different providers and what you need to do, and it just seems the most complex thing to other people. So if we want to get people to embrace EVs, and we want to get people to even have them on their radar and consider them, these sort of things are simple things to do. Because even though you explain to people 80% of your charging is going to be at home or in the office, whatever, they still talk about those 2 trips they make, those long trips they make during the year, and how are they going to do it. And when you start telling them that each provider has their own system, that just, you can see them already, they're already losing interest. So I think simplicity is the key thing there. We need to make it as easy as possible for people to charge, both in terms, obviously, of the number of charging points around the country, but also how you pay for them seems like a really simple way of dealing with with that. And it seems to be a key thing we need to do.
Nail on the head there, I would say. That was very, very neatly put. And in terms of, actually, that's the point, up until very recently, Ecars, you didn't actually need to pay to use it at all. I'm right in saying, Paul, that the early days, which were actually not that long ago, that it was free to use. So what was the rationale behind it being free to use? Were there any regulations that meant you couldn't implement charging at that point? And what's the kind of tariff situation now?
Yeah, so pricing was only introduced on the AC network, on the DC network first, so on the fasts, from 2019. I think it was around September. Some of the members on will know better than I would. Around September 2019, and then the DCs came in 2020. So the pay to use scheme has only been introduced in the last number of years. And I suppose there's a key point here, which is pay to use has been implemented on the existing RFID access system, let's say, on the basis of it could be done without having to heavily, go at the hardware itself. Because if you start trying to add contactless terminals to chargers, not only is it complicated and costly, there's good evidence that a lot of charging hardware can't accommodate, particularly the AC side of things, just can't accommodate contactless payment. Hence, it's not a requirement in the UK yet for AC chargers. But I suppose looking backwards, it took us quite a while to get to a point where we could introduce pay to use on the Irish network, purely because we were still working through taking what was a pilot network built in a tripartite agreement with government and car manufacturers to a kind of a business that could be run as such. So it's taken until now for that to really come to a point where we can now start to look to the next stage, which will be, and I suppose that's the key point, is contactless payment will be something we'll be including on new hardware insofar as we can. But generally speaking, retrofitting is a tricky business. There's no guarantees that you can always get the existing infrastructure to work cleanly with contactless payment options.
True, we've certainly seen that in Scotland as well. Some of the older makes and models of hardware don't support it and do need to be replaced as a result if it's a legislatory requirement. So, and on AC, I understand that contactless credit card readers can sometimes be quite expensive to install or to run. So whoever can come up with a very cheap contactless payment solution for AC will probably make an absolute mint off of the charging networks across Europe, because that is definitely an issue that's on the horizon. But I think it's time for our next poll. So EV drivers amongst us, what is the most common issue that you've encountered when you've been using public charge points in the Republic of Ireland? So I mean, obviously there is an answer there that you've maybe rarely encountered any issues. Everything seems to be fine. But what's the most common issue that you have had? Is the charge point out of service? Is it someone hogging a DC charger all the way to 100%? Even if they don't meet that range, is there an issue actually starting or stopping the charging session? Is there a billing issue? In other words, you've either not been issued your bill or payment, or well, you've been charged more than you were meant to have. And then of course, there's our old nemesis icing, blocking a charge point with a internal combustion engined vehicle, petrol or diesel. So what is the most common problem that you've encountered? I will give you 10 more seconds to answer that. And then, Paul, you've got your hand up. We'll let you jump in.
Thank you very much, Euan. Just in terms of the discussion regarding contactless payment, the faster project's criteria for our charge points is that they have to be cross-compatible across all 3 jurisdictions. In the Scottish context, that means they have to be able to work with ChargePlace Scotland, but if someone comes to the Republic or comes to Northern Ireland, they essentially have to be able to use the chargers easily with absolutely no issue. So for that reason, we are prioritising cash contactless payment with the bank card or credit card, essentially. And we are not really interested in proprietary apps and that level of complexity. Part of the reason is to facilitate tourism, especially in some of our more remote rural areas in the Wild Atlantic Way. Someone in an EV from Germany should just be able to use these and not have to sign up for anything. So an app is not our focus. They will all be contactless payments as a priority within our context.
That's good to know, actually, because yeah, contactless is the ultimate universal solution for charging electric vehicles on I was going to say rapid chargers, but that's the point. Nomenclature alert. So in mainland Britain and in Northern Ireland, a 50 kilowatt DC charger is called a rapid charger. In the Republic of Ireland, it's called a fast charger. And I believe that anything above 100 kilowatts in the Republic of Ireland is called rapid, but in Scotland we would call that high power. So yeah, there's a bit of actually what we would call fast is 7 to 22 kilowatt AC, which isn't terribly fast. So yeah, there's there may occasionally be slips in nomenclature. I do try to put my Republic of Ireland hat on when discussing the infrastructure in Republic of Ireland, but apologies if I slip up on that. But yeah, so interesting results from the poll. Unsurprisingly, just over a quarter of you haven't really encountered that many charging issues. It's really only the people who do encounter issues that you hear about. But yeah, charge points being out of service is something that desperately does need to be resolved, particularly in Northern Ireland. And Northern Ireland will have its own webinar later in the year in December. I think it's 7th of December, if that's a Wednesday, at 11 a.m. again. But also hogging of DC chargers to 100%, which brings us neatly on to one of the next questions that I have, actually, and then the RFID card or the app refusing to behave itself. But on the topic of hogging all the way to 100%, so you know, a fast charger, a DC charger, is meant to be, it's called fast because it's for people who are in a hurry, who do need a quick top up of 20 kilowatt hours or so to get them where they need to be. That last kind of 80 to 100%, you tend to see the charging power fall off of a cliff to the point you'd be as well going to an adjacent AC charge point. So ESB Ecars, and also Chris, I'll bring you in from EasyGo immediately afterwards. Do you have overstay penalties particularly for your DC chargers? What are those penalties and when are they applied? After what time limit, if you do have them? And also similarly, do you have a penalty for anyone who ices your charging infrastructure? So Paul first.
Yeah, I'll start in reverse. So icing, unfortunately, we can't do anything by way of direct intervention. If there was a way of applying a fine, we've had lots of conversations about technological solutions as companies in parts of Europe and the UK who are offering automatic number plate recognition, but that comes with a cost in terms of implementing some sort of CCTV system on site that can pick a reg and then send a fine, and then you have to implement all of the policies and regulations around that. And it just becomes almost impossible. And I go back to the idea of where we'll get with this is, as EV uptake continues, it'll be a little bit like abandoning your car in a wheelchair space. People will just say, hey, that's just not good enough, keep moving. So if it's an ICE situation, I think, at the moment we're managing that through whether it's public sites and through engagement with the local authorities. So if it's essentially a traffic infringement, there can be essentially towing or clamping can be implemented depending on where it is. Or if it's a private site, working with the site host to try and make them aware that we want them to help with trying to keep the vehicles out of the EV bays. For overstay fees, it's a pretty straight answer. When we implemented pricing shortly after, we implemented overstay fees on the DC chargers, so on the 50 kilowatt and above. So on our rapid or fast and high powered chargers, they all have an €8 overstay fee beyond 45 minutes, and for every 45 minutes thereafter, which is a flat number. We're not doing it by the minute or anything at the moment. There's technological reasons why we aren't. And on the AC chargers, after 10 hours as well, an €8 fee cumulatively applying after that for every 10 hours after. We are continually watching how that's working, how it's not working, where let's say the infringements are. I know that engagement with the Irish EV Owners Association will be key to kind of get the feedback from the boots on the ground of people who are living it and feeling it, to be able to say, look, it's working here but not working here, and we'll see, over time it might change, but that's the current arrangement that we have.
Thank you, Paul. And same question to yourself, Chris.
Yeah, thanks very much, Euan. So for the overstay penalties, we bring in an overstay penalty on the DC charging only, and that's really if people are going to be there for an hour, and we find that with a 50 kilowatt charge point, people can, they bring 45, 50 kilowatts into their car, which more or less fills the car up anyway within an hour. And as you said, with the statistics, people only want to stop for 20 kilowatts anyway. We can see who the offenders are. The odd time we have just sent an odd message out to somebody, just politely asking them to move on when the car is charged. But I think the etiquette out there at the minute is people expect an overstay penalty so they don't overstay. We very rarely see overstays happening at the minute, which is very, very good. For ICE vehicles coming in onto the site or onto the charge points, we find having a green bay marked out is probably the biggest deterrent. Nobody seems to read a sign that's right in front of them when they drive into an EV parking space. But when they're driving and they see it green, I think they treat it the same as if they see blue marking on the ground and just typically avoid it. And we see this when we put in the charge point first. If there's delay in marking the ground space, we find that icing generally stops as soon as it's painted green. We are looking at an option at the minute, and I know we spoke about the apps and the reasons for apps and different logins and whatever for finding or for getting access to the charge points. Something we're bringing in, and it is coming into our app, will be a parking sensor, so that if somebody is looking for a charge point on the EasyGo app, they can see that yes, the charge point is free, which it probably will be if there's an ICE car in front of it, but they'll also be able to see that the parking space is blocked. So that may change how they approach attending that charge point, and it will help as well. It'll also help with local authorities too, who are enforcing parking and clamping.
That's really interesting. Thank you. And actually, that's perfect timing for our next poll, Donald, if you could kindly do the honours, because, well, it's on the exact topic we've just been talking about. Should all local authorities and charging networks immediately introduce automatic overstay penalties for DC chargers? I have a sneaking suspicion I know what the answer will be. But whilst we're getting the almost 100% yes vote coming through, I suppose Geraldine and Roland, from your two perspectives, Geraldine first, what's your thoughts on the overstay penalties that have just been discussed? Do you think they're fair? Do you think that they are well, from your own experience, have they been required? Certainly in Scotland, we strongly advocate overstays. You'll find that the average EV driver will. But yeah, interested to get the thoughts of end users in the Republic of Ireland.
Yeah, I think generally they've been welcomed, and I think hogging itself has been reduced considerably since they were introduced. I think it's also interesting when what you were talking about, saying that the public network, the ESB public network, was free for a long time, and then they started to charge for it. It was interesting, the reaction to that, because it was non-EV drivers who thought that was a really bad idea. And they were saying, you know, if you're trying to encourage people to drive electric cars, why would you suddenly start charging for the public network? Yet people who drove electric cars were delighted with it because it would free up charging points, and it meant that people were only using it like they should, which is only just dipping in and out of charging points, you know, to get them onto their next destination. So I think it's interesting, just the perception. I think most people definitely would be in favour. Any of the EV drivers I've spoke to are in favour of the charging network being paid for, and they're in favour of overstay penalties, definitely. It's people who don't drive the cars that think, why don't you have those if you want to encourage people? But they don't work to encourage people. So I think they kind of work in reverse. If you make these things free, or you don't have penalties.
You make such a great point there, actually, because it's funny how people who don't drive EVs are surprised that people who do drive EVs want to pay more to drive EVs by not having free charging, because it encourages fair use. Roland, anything else to add on that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, having been in that situation where we could still do this for free, hogging was a problem, or even locals going to the fast charger because of us for free rather than having to charge at home. I've even ran into cases myself where someone was just reading their magazine and they literally lived 2 houses down the road. They just wanted to get the quick charge to charge up their car, and you're on the way, you want to go, you need to go somewhere very fast, and they're just sitting there waiting for their car to fully charge. And now with the overcharge fees, it definitely has helped to get people to be more respectful of the time they take, and also it makes sense because these fast chargers and superchargers, high power chargers, whatever we want to call them, right? It's all about how you move on to the next journey. How do you continue with your journey, rather than sitting there for an hour trying to charge up your car while someone else is actually waiting for you to be able to charge. It's just, you know, it doesn't make a lot of sense. What we do hear a lot from within the community is that while this works for private users, we do see business users who do not really have to worry about the overcharge fees. That it happens quite a lot, where companies would have gone for, you know, business vans and use them. They just basically sit there waiting for their cars to be fully charged before they move on to their journey. So we do hear some of that feedback from our members that, yeah, while it gets very well adopted by most of the community members and EV owners, we do see sometimes that business users are behaving a bit differently because they're not worried about the cost of it.
Absolutely. I mean, you've hit the nail on the head. I could go into so many rants about situations where that's happened in Scotland as well, where the charging network is free, where it's not free, and where there's overstays, it basically disappears overnight, that situation. And it means that the same amount of infrastructure services even more EVs because it's being used fairly. And now I'm aware, well, thank you, Paul, and thank you, Chris, as well for your input and for actually introducing those overstays. I'm going to mix things up a bit because Brian Tapley from ESB Networks has been sitting very patiently waiting to come in on this. Now, ESB Networks, basically, the Republic of Ireland would not have charging infrastructure without getting the power to it. So your role in this is absolutely essential. And in terms of the role of Republic of Ireland's network operator, if you wish, in rolling out that charging infrastructure, I'm keen to find out how ESB Networks engages with charging infrastructure providers to make sure that that power is provided. And I'm keen to find out what costs are involved so that end users can appreciate why a fast charger may be more expensive than charging at home. So yeah, say that that Paul or Chris came to you and said we need to put in a 150 kilowatt rapid charger in comparatively kind of middle of nowhere. What would the process be from there, and what would the cost be, Brian?
Thank you. Yeah. Look, I suppose ESB Networks obviously provides the connection point to all customers who need electricity, whether it's an EV charger or a home charger, for example. So look, our network by and large has the capacity for the increase in electric vehicles that we're seeing, but obviously in certain hotspots or certain parts of the network, we do have to reinforce the network. I suppose in preparation for what we expect to come in terms of e-heat and also electrical transport and electrical heat. So we're investing about 135 million over the next 5 years on our low voltage network, which is where most of the connections will be made. In terms of charging, so there's a couple of components to the cost we might quote, and typically it's based on capacity. So if someone is looking for 15 kilowatts, there's a standard capacity charge agreed with the regulator, the CRU, that we will charge. But if someone's looking for 150 kilowatts, that capacity charge is increased. And again, it's a publicly available capacity charge. So that's the first thing. So it really depends on what level of load is being looked for. If the capacity being looked for is, let's say, around 15 kilowatts, the likelihood is we can supply that from our existing LV network. So in addition, you've got a capacity charge, but then we might have to, put some infrastructure in and maybe do some small civil works to enable that. That cost would be less than if you looked for, say, 150 or 200 kilowatts. In order for us to provide that, we might actually have to put in a medium voltage to low voltage substation and maybe do more civil works than we would for the 15 kilowatt connection. So depending on the capacity you're looking for and depending how close your connection point is to our network, that will really drive the civil work costs and the reinforcement on the network. So I can't give you specific figures for the 150 because it depends where it is in the country, how close it is to the network. But the capacity aspect is agreed with the regulator and is publicly available. The civil works are effectively, I suppose, a pass-through charge that we pass on to the customer because we have to do the civil works. It would be ideal if the local authorities were agreeable to let the customer do the civil works. That would maybe speed up things for the customer and maybe even reduce costs for the customer. But at the moment, certainly on the East Coast and in Dublin, ESB Networks has to do the civil works. So I'm not sure if that answers the kind of the components that make up the charge.
Yeah, that's interesting. And on that note, certainly in Scotland, if a new substation is required, obviously the cost of a substation is what it is. You can't do much about the hardware price. But in terms of the end cost to the person who is, or the company that's installing the charger, what we find is that the cost is relatively socialized. So a substation will be put in, but whether it's ESB, EasyGo or someone else wouldn't pay the full costs associated with that because other people and other businesses will inevitably join onto that substation. So that's socialized, and it means that it's not all lumped onto the person who triggered the requirement for that substation to be installed. Is that the case in the Republic of Ireland, or would the person installing one 50 kilowatt fast charger have to pay 6 figures for a new substation, even although other people would then connect onto it later on?
Yeah. So it's the same in the Republic of Ireland in terms of the cost is socialized. So if you apply for, let's say, 150 kilowatts, and we therefore need to put in an MV to LV substation, we don't charge you for the MV-LV substation. We charge you for the capacity, the 150 kilowatts. But because we're having to put in an MV and LV substation, there may be more civil works and trenching that has to be done by the simple fact we're having to connect to the MV network and provide an LV connection. But absolutely, we don't charge you for that substation because we will use that substation to provide other customers connection to the network in the future. So we do socialize that charge. Yeah.
Excellent, because unless I'm mistaken, in Northern Ireland that's not so much the case, and it's all kind of lumped on to the person who needs the new substation, if I recall correctly. I've certainly seen some indicative of quotes for a 50 kilowatt charger in Northern Ireland, and I swear it's one of those things where it's like the document leaps out of the screen and slaps you across the face. Yeah. So yeah, that's good to hear that's it's probably why charging infrastructure in the Republic of Ireland is certainly the envy of your neighbours to the north. And on that note, we do have a poll, but I'll come back to that because that leads very neatly into the emergence of competition in the Republic of Ireland. And of course, we have Chris from EasyGo, one of the first movers, if you wish, out with the ESB Ecars network, and I believe Ireland's first homegrown charging network. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct, Euan. Yeah, we started a network back in the days when we were competing with ESB Ecars supplying electricity for free, and everybody said, "Are you crazy? How can you compete when you're selling electricity?" But somebody had to make the move and become the first mover there, and then we're here for the long term. It wasn't just a quick setup that we were trying to achieve and get on a map or something. We're here to try and build a proper fast charging and slow charging network for public and for destinations.
Absolutely. And it's interesting that you mentioned that you started when ESB Ecars was still free, because that's effectively what Instavolt did in Scotland. In fact, right down to the hardware that you're using, the tritium chargers, it was the exact same ones they put in. And what we generally found is that people would use Instavolt because it was reliable. It took contactless credit card payment. Admittedly, it helped that Instavolt kind of did free charging for the first kind of few months, and then obviously put on their charging tariff, but people still used them because they were reliable. And is that what you found with your own network, even although you were up against free competition?
It was, and exactly the points that you mentioned. The having the charging infrastructure there, even though there was free charging, it did tend to be hugged by people who live close by, whereas people who were on the move a lot, they just wanted to get a charge, grab what they needed to get home or to get to their destination. So they didn't mind paying for electricity. Now, of course, it was cheaper back then, which was only a few years ago, but that's all to do with the energy prices now, and price rises now. But it was cheaper back then, and it was still quite cheap, to charge your car, a fast charger, and add what you needed, the amount of power you needed to get home. The contactless payment definitely is a huge thing for us. We implemented on all of our fast chargers now. What we put out, and we've started to implement it on our AC chargers as well. So you're going to see a lot of that popping up as costs can come down and it becomes manageable to be able to do it. But having that reliable network and having a network where people can say, and one of the comments I'll never forget somebody saying was, at least if we go to an EasyGo charger, the chances of it being free or somebody moving on is pretty high because they have to pay for it. And so it's going to be available to use.
Absolutely, yeah. And here's a fun question for you, because when ESB did introduce charging tariffs on fast chargers, did you see any change in the utilization of EasyGo chargers? Did it increase? Did it decrease? Did it stay about the same?
No, it did stay about the same. Yeah, because it was just on the DC chargers initially. It did. It stayed about the same. It did raise slightly, I suppose, as our profile raised in the country as well. Then a lot more people started to use our charge points too. But no, we didn't find a huge increase.
See, I think that's actually worth quite a lot of stakeholders taking note in various different countries, because in Scotland, the number of UK-wide charging networks that have said that they're being very cautious about expanding into Scotland because vast swathes of ChargePlay Scotland are still free. The number of EV drivers will turn around to them and say, we just want stuff that's reliable. We want a choice. In fact, I see Roland and Geraldine nodding away in agreement there, certainly from your own experience. And this obviously isn't a dig at so much at ChargePlay Scotland or indeed at ESB Ecars as first movers in the original network. But I think it's more a case of having choice and reliability. Would you agree, Geraldine?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is why I said that it was the non-EV drivers that couldn't understand why anybody would welcome, charging for the public network, whereas EV drivers were delighted because it just meant it was utilised in the way it should be. And exactly as you said, it meant the limited charging points that were there were now going to serve far more people. And I think in the end of the day, people just want to move on from A to B. They don't want to have charging points. They just want to know that there's a reliable charging point en route to their journey, and they don't want to have to go to great planning and go out of their way. So I mean, the more that are available, they're quite happy to pay just to make that journey more convenient. So they don't have any problems with paying.
Yeah, and on that note as well, obviously it's not just EasyGo that's installing fast chargers. We do have, as Paul, you alluded to earlier, ESB Ecars installing rapid chargers or high power chargers, sort of 100+ kilowatt. There's some that are proper like Swiss Army knives. They can charge loads of different EVs at once, the big Delta units and so on. I've certainly seen them springing up, and the first kind of bona fide high power charging hub in the Republic of Ireland as well. It's good to see that kind of variety coming in with contactless credit card payment, as you alluded to. So I mean, Roland, what's the feedback been from Irish EV Owners Association members about this kind of shiny new infrastructure, not just from EasyGo, and I keep saying the private sector, technically ESB's private as well, but I just kind of think of it as the kind of almost nationalized but not nationalized first mover, but also with ESB Ecars and their high power charging infrastructure. What's the feedback been about these developments then from an EV driver perspective?
It's very well received. We would like to see more. We would like to see more locations with a multitude of different charge points. I think particularly when you think about cross-country trips that people would do, particularly people that even are doing staycations, they want to go from Dublin, they want to go down to Dingle, trying to make that, they currently have to plan a little bit and to find the right charge point to do that. And often it's one charge point in that one location where they can do their fast charge. And of course, in those times, particularly in the holiday season, it becomes a bit of a queuing fiasco. So this is where we need more of these kind of multitude of hubs. We don't need many, but we just need a few that have quite a number of charge points where they could go. I mean, of course, every extension we see, we welcome a lot. We want to get more charge points. We want to see more destination charges as well. I know recently they, for example, launched the charge point infrastructure at Livy Valley, which has been fantastic. It's been long awaited to get a big, massive shopping center to actually get charge points installed. And we need more of this, right, across the country to really show as well to those that are on the edge or on the fence for deciding to move to electric vehicles, to see that the charge point infrastructure is there, can be leveraged, isn't constantly in a state of stress because there's a huge amount of cars that need to charge there. But we need to continue to build that infrastructure and work with the community to find the right spots where these charge points should be and what kind of size they should be. And the challenge what we see is that often we don't know the kind of throughput, and this is really what we are interested in, is trying to understand where do we have the hotspots in the country where we have a constantly queuing mechanism of people needing to charge, and I think in the frequency on the charge points being used, I think it should definitely leverage that kind of insights to help in expanding the charge point capabilities in that network.
Definitely finding those hotspots. I just want to very quickly cut in because I've just realized, sorry, that Brian needs to drop off now. Sorry about that, but we'll come back to you in a second. Yeah. Brian, thank you so much for all your time. Does anyone have any questions regarding the DNO side of things before Brian drops off? Because it's been, it's been great to get very candid insight from a distribution network operator about the financials and the civils that are required in expanding this infrastructure. I think that's been great insight. So thank you, Brian. But any final questions before he drops off? Excellent. I think we're all good from the audience as well. Thank you so much. That has been really good insight. We've very much appreciated it, Brian. Sorry about the slight delay in letting you go there.
No problem. Thank you. Thanks for the invite.
Thank you. Cheers. Take care. But yeah, Roland, sorry, you were saying about the identifying the hotspots, basically, where there is a need for more infrastructure.
Yes. Yeah, and I think in addition to this, right, we have now introduced charging for infrastructure, which is great. It's been welcome, as Geraldine alluded to as well, right? What we also would like to see is more transparency, ideally even inclusion of parking charges because this is very inconsistent across every county council. Some county councils, you have to pay for parking, and if you have someone traveling from Cork where it's free, they travel to Dublin, they have to go to a hospital appointment or whatever, they use a charge point and they get clamped because they thought it was also free. This across the country, I think we need to think about how this can be best implemented, and maybe the ask to ESB and EasyGo and other charge point providers is just to see with the county councils if that somehow can be incorporated in the charging costs.
Brilliant idea.
Then it becomes much easier for people to plug in and charge, and yes, they pay for it, but they equally pay for the parking at the same time, rather than separately having to run off to the parking meter to then pay for the parking as well.
Well, actually, since we have representatives from a local authority and from ESB Ecars, does that sound like something that you could bang heads and get that kind of parking charge put in with the charging tariff automatically?
From a local authority perspective, I suppose the devil would be in the detail on that, because I know some local authorities are waiving the charges where there is parking done, and then you would have, if you're not charging for it, then the only control can be through the late stay or prolonged stay charges, then, because you can't put a ticket on the car because you're not charging for the parking. So you take away that sort of control from a parking attendant by not having charging at that location. The other thing is as well is it's not just EasyGo, there's a number of other providers, and how you would incorporate that into the charging system that you would then be paying the local authority. It also comes down to what contract would be in place, be it a concession, a lease, a license, or if it's just a design, build, operate contract that you're looking at going down the line with the charge point operator. So to be, of course, there is a solution to it, no doubt about it, but it's just getting kind of that discussion going around it,
Yeah, it comes down to making it easy, right? As Geraldine said earlier, but the payment, if we can make it easier for people to, know they can go to a charge point, plug in, start charging at the same time, the fact that they're there maybe for 30 minutes, they pay for the parking space, if that is applicable in that particular county council area, to pay for that they also, get it included in the price and move on. I think if you give people, say, an hour, and they only need 30 minutes, they're going to use the hour, and therefore for other people, they're going to be hogging the space where they actually don't need it, but because they paid for the parking already, they think, well, I might as well use that time anyway. So it helps everyone if this is one bill for the end consumer. I understand the complexity behind the scenes then from a cross-charging back to the county councils for every extra parking payment that have been included in the pricing, but it definitely will help drive the simplicity messaging to the users that want to use those charge points.
Yeah, it is a good solution. It is a good solution. There's no doubt about it. But I suppose if you look at historically, the likes of the ESB Ecars, who had free parking, and it's probably coming from that. Now when we're getting to a bill system going forward, I'd say there will be kind of that solutions integrated into the contracts.
And another,
I think technically it is possible. It absolutely is possible to do it. And it's possible to work with the councils and provide what it is. But as Michael did say, there's rules and regulations there already in place that this has to merge into, but it has to merge into 31 different councils rules and regulations, because they've all got different bylaws. And say it can be flexible for the different bylaws, but it does become a logistical I suppose piece of hard work to try and make it happen. It should happen over a number of years. It should be phased in, and there's no reason why it can't be phased in across any CPO and across any council. But it's because I think the number of stakeholders and the amount of documentation and changes that need to be made. But it needs to be made at a much higher level than a council level, because then it just incorporates all 31 councils together.
Yep.
Yeah,
Okay.
I was just going to say, we've seen that in the UK, that not only within from city to city, but even within, say, London, the different boroughs have different policies, and it can lead to nothing but heartache for the end user. And that's the real key, when you find yourself on the receiving end of calls asking, do I or don't I pay the parking fee here? You realize that something has failed above. So exactly as Chris said, I think it's probably something that should be on ZEVI's radar, to talk to central government about what that then cascades back down to councils by way of kind of normalized regulation across the councils.
This has been really interesting. I think there's definitely a lot to kind of formulate and take away, and hopefully for local authorities across the Republic of Ireland to sit down and try and agree some sort of consensus. Because even, I mean, if they maintain free parking whilst charging, then that doesn't change the tariff. That's fine. If a parking, if a parking levy is applied whilst charging, then yeah, if you can include that automatically within the charging session, that means that nobody's unfairly caught out, because as you said, they've kind of crossed counties and didn't know that the rules were different depending on where you go. Similar situation in Charge Place, Scotland, incidentally, as well, with the 32 local authorities in Scotland. But yeah, no, there's definitely some useful feedback there. It's great to see how much discussion that properly stirred up there. Now, I'm aware that we haven't had a poll in a while, and this kind of leads neatly on to the next question I have for Chris. So if we can run poll number 5, what would be the priority for DC, or what should be the priority for DC charging networks in the Republic of Ireland? Because what we've seen is, of course, historically, it's been individual 50 kilowatt DC chargers. Are they still relevant today? Should we be expanding the number of DC chargers at existing sites, increasing the number of DC chargers increasing the power, I should say, of DC chargers at existing sites. So, going up to kind of 100 plus kilowatts or other. And then in the case of other, do specify your answers in the chat. But on that note, we know a bit about ESB Ecars plans for the future, of course. But Chris, in terms of EasyGo, what are your plans for the future? Because I understand that at the moment, obviously, there's been a bit of AC, well, a fair bit of AC, and there have been some sort of 50 kilowatt fast DC. Where do you see EasyGo going with the next kind of stage? Are you looking at higher power? Are you looking at more chargers per site?
Yeah, so currently we're looking at reaching out right across the country with 50 and 75 kilowatt charge points. Because we're, even though we could look at just the heavily populated areas and where there's going to be a lot of run through and throughput of traffic, we found that we want to deal with all of the councils, and not all of the councils have a huge amount of EVs in their area, but they still want to cater for people who are traveling, whether it be tourists or whether it be locals or whether it be people just moving around the country. So our aim is to put at least 150 or 75 kilowatt DC into every town. Now we have a couple of reasons for that. With ESB Networks, it can be a little tricky and expensive to get a 100 kilowatt or more onto a site. To get a 50 kilowatts power from ESB Networks is quite easy within a town. To get 2 or 3 of these on one site, again, can be quite difficult because you're bringing it to over 100 kVA or 150 kVA. So we will be installing 150s and we will be installing 350s where needs be. But our immediate plans, which you're going to see in the next year, I think you're going to see something like between 70 and 100 new sites popping up. And I say new sites because it's not just going to be a load of chargers put into one area, and they are going to be sites. And as the sites get busier, and we are monitoring how busy they are, we will be turning them into hubs.
Excellent. And you know what? The poll results that have just come in have surprised me, because I genuinely thought that it would be more call for high power, more call for hubs. But what you said about getting the backbone of the infrastructure in place, getting a 50 kilowatt charger in every town, that aligns with 3/5 of the respondents who want more sites.
Our market research was good.
Yeah, I mean, genuinely, I think if we ran the same poll in Scotland, they would laugh that suggestion out of the room. But it just shows you that geographical coverage is so important. And Scotland's got really good geographical coverage at the moment. But obviously, the Republic of Ireland, there are still those kind of charge point deserts, or charge air deserts, I should say. I mean, a good example was when I was in Doolin a few years ago, and they had a solitary socket, not even a twin-headed 7 kilowatt charge point. It was a solitary 7 kilowatt socket. And I thought, that is a risk and a half, because if you turn up and that's either in use already or broken, that's you that's you scuppered basically. So yeah, the ability to have something like that, especially in somewhere that's a massive tourist hotspot like Doolin, would be amazing. Paul also sitting there taking notes. Doolin, okay. So yeah, we'll have Ecars and EasyGo having a bun fight over who gets Doolin. But yeah, honestly, this has been amazing. We do have actually. Poll 6 can be scrapped because it was, where are sites with 150? Actually, no, it's asking about the geographical location. Poll 6, let's run that one, Donald. So where are sites with one solitary 50 kilowatt fast charger, still fit for purpose? Because you've confused the heck out of this Scotsman. You lovely, lovely people have confused me as to the fact that it would still be considered like fit for purpose today. So yeah, I'll be interested to see whereabouts the EV driving public and non-EV driving public have in mind for where these chargers would be located. And whilst we're waiting on the results of that poll, Geraldine, as someone who obviously covers a lot of mileage as a motoring editor, where would you see as being the best kind of locations within the Republic of Ireland for these individual chargers?
I think rural areas are particularly badly served at the moment, and there are definitely, as you said, pockets of the country that are a total challenge if you're driving an electric car. So it really depends on where you're going, because I mean, I've spoke to lots of people who've had no problems with the public charging network, but it always depends on what route they take. And then you've others that take a different route and they have just been plagued with it. So I definitely think rural areas are probably the areas at the moment that are the worst served. And definitely there are pockets that are particularly bad. So that's where I think even one solitary charger would make a difference.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose, Roland, I suppose it would be much in agreement there, certainly, because having seen the poll results, most people seem to be in agreement too.
Yeah, definitely. Rural areas we definitely need, and I think, as Chris mentioned, right, it is the right strategy. And I think in addition, having them on, say, major hubs around the major routes. I think that's where we see the most traffic coming through the country. I think you need these hubs. And then, of course, within geographical areas, and particularly in the rural areas, we need to have, those charge points, better distributed. Because I think, indeed, you were running to kind of desert areas. I remember even the years where there was no fast charger in Cavan, so yeah, you were lucky if you would cross through Cavan to get to a fast charger to get started.
Mm-hmm. Actually, can I just say, in terms of the poll results, the 6 people who said that a solitary 50 kilowatt fast charger should be at a trunk road service station for people in a hurry. Be careful what you wish for. I've seen the end result when that happens. It's not pretty, especially if the hardware is unreliable. But yeah, I think we're almost coming to Q&A time. And in fact, we are basically coming to the Q&A time, because one of the questions that I had for both EasyGo and ESB Ecars was also asked by someone who emailed in this morning. And they were asking about public charging infrastructure for people without driveways. So, I mean, to give a bit of background, in kind of mainland, well, certainly down in London, and in some pockets of Scotland as well, we've seen local authorities taking advantage of the on-street residential charge point scheme, which obviously is completely separate to the Republic of Ireland. It's a UK thing, but ZEVI will be doing something similar, no doubt. But what we've seen is a mixture of solutions. We've seen discrete on-street charging infrastructure that minimises street furniture, so it's very, very kind of narrow, and it doesn't really get in the way of wheelchairs or bikes or prams or pedestrians. We've seen urban rapid charging hubs in Dundee, for example. So you basically treat it like a petrol station for electric cars. So you can either charge slowly overnight on the pavement outside your house, or go to a petrol station for electric cars. What are EasyGo and ESB Ecars, we'll start with EasyGo, doing for people who don't have the ability to charge at home? Are you engaging with local authorities in terms of how to provide those charging solutions for local residents?
Yeah, we have. We've engaged with local authorities. Unfortunately, we've come across a problem that is quite unique to Ireland, in that to run out multiple charge points, AC charge points, on a street, we need to have a meter at each charge point, an individual meter at each charge point. Now it's something we're trying to work with through ESB Networks on this. But it just makes it not viable because each one is an ESB application and ESB meter. So rather than having 2, 3, 4, 10 charge points on a street connected back to one meter connection, we have to actually have a meter connection per charge point.
I wish that we'd raised that with Brian before he dropped off. That's a really good point.
Yeah, no, it creates it as a challenge and an expensive challenge. So what it means is that for the moment, until it's resolved, unfortunately, we're just going to have to step away from that that part of the business, which is unfortunate. But it just means that we're not allowed to put cables under the streets for charging.
That's interesting. I wonder if there's a way around that in any way, if it's like a kind of central dynamic load managed unit that's feeding power to lots of different sockets. If that would that count as one unit, or would that be?
No, it's all got to do with power under the ground, and who is allowed to run power cables under the ground. And currently ESB Networks are the only ones that can run the power cable under the ground.
I see. Yeah. Goodness me. Well, I mean, on that note then, obviously the wrong branch of ESB, but Paul, do you have any kind of information on that? I appreciate it's two totally separate entities, but I'm also interested to find out what Ecars is planning to do for local residents without driveways too.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're aware of the exact same problem from the exact same perspective as Chris, so it's not news to us. But I think what's important to kind of do, and I often find myself looking at the UK as the kind of the what's the difference between the markets, because we can see the dynamic is different. And in the UK, offices with zero emissions vehicles have been in situ since 2016, I think. You probably know better than I do. But essentially, they've 6-7 years of time spent on working through the process of getting the on-street residential charging scheme up and running in the first place, but then also working with Ofgem and the regulators of the energy network to evolve aspects of it that maybe aren't right, and at the same time looking at things like the local implications on authorities around road licensing and other kind of implications. So essentially, without trying to hang everything on ZEVI here, I think us having an entity that can act as, let's say, the intermediary, for want of a better explanation, between charge point operators like ourselves and EasyGo and the network and their client, because the network's business in ESB is a client of the regulation of the utilities. So ultimately there may be things there that need to happen up and then down again. There is a grant scheme in place, the SEAI Electric Vehicle Public Charge Point Grant, which is available to local authorities, and I know there's probably some of them on the line here that have looked at it, have maybe tried to apply for it, and hit roadblocks. And that's where I think even for them trying to unlock the idea of doing on-street residential charging schemes, whether it be in urban centres or other suitable locations, don't give up hope. I think ZEVI are going to be really important to getting the public charge point grant off the ground. I know it's had its difficulties, and I think once those are overcome, market operators like EasyGo and ourselves will be able to then come in and do the let's say the tip of the iceberg bit, because it's a lot below the waterline before you get to the charge point.
True. And I suppose from a local authority perspective, working around the legislation that's already in place, the kind of meter issues, etc. Michael, what's the likes of Louth County Council doing for residents without driveways at the moment? Have you got a strategy that you're developing or deploying at present?
Well, through ZEVI, we're actually looking at what is the best way forward for this, and even in relation to charge points, not only just for residents without driveways, but we're looking at maybe setting up regional approaches. So rather than each local authority taking an individual approach, that you're taking a regional approach, and then where you're gonna have the houses or the properties without charge points is going to be in town centres. Most people in the country will have a charge point available to them. So if you're putting out on the street individual charge points in the public area, again, the business case for them individual charge points is not great, because they're going to be AC charging, slow charging. If you're charging 30 cents per kilowatt hour, they're not profitable. So I don't know what EasyGo think or ESB Ecars, but I'd say that the profitable areas are going to be in the rapid and ultra rapid charge points. So at the moment, there's no grant funding available to us. We're one of the only local authorities who have taken up that SEAI grant scheme, and we're trying to identify locations basically right beside existing ESB mini pillars where we can put them, where there's rows of terraced houses. But even at that, you know, as the uptake of EV cars comes along, who's going to use them? You come at night to use that there, you're sat on it for 8 hours overnight, and your neighbour needs it because they need it too, and there's only one charge point. So I think the solution, personally, I think the solution from looking at this is, I think in Norway they have a kind of a subsidised scheme for the use of rapid chargers. So if you have a number of hubs and rapid chargers in the town centre where you can go at your convenience, or even have an extra subsidised rate if you use it at night where you're using green energy. Again, so then you're not hogging it for the person who's using it for a destination. You're going at night, getting your quick charge and getting away. I think that's the solution personally. That's not a strategy, you know, that's in place. But I think as local authorities are going to look at this, it's going to have to be kind of a regional and a national strategy just to deal with this alone. And I think, again, when we are doing up our urban streets at the moment, there's a huge amount of money's been spent. We're decluttering. So the last thing we want to do now is start cluttering the streets with chargers, and then if they come damaged, who's responsible for that damage? You know, so, and another a point was made by ESB there as well is licensing. You can't just dig up the streets. You're going to have to get a road open license if you're taking the connection from your own metered connection and from your house. Again, so there's a licensing process for that. So look, it's going to have to be looked at and a solution come up with, you know. But I think cluttering the street with a number of slow or fast chargers may not be the solution.
Actually,
Yeah,
oh, sorry, go on.
Sorry, no, Euan, I was just going to say, I agree with Michael. In Ireland, we're quite lucky in that we have so much off-street parking, and so many people can actually charge at home. And I think that's absolutely where the majority of charging will be done. Zevi have been fantastic with bringing out this new apartment block charging scheme as well, which caters for huge car parks in town and city centres as well. So I think the focus on street AC parking for residential is not going to be a huge point, because if you're going to put it outside somebody's house, well, then that somebody really is entitled to use that parking space more so than other people, and then you're relying on them having an EV as well. So, you know, if we put a lot of AC charge points along a street and nobody on the street owns an EV, they've all got petrol or diesel cars, is that going to turn into an icing problem when, you know, they've been parking there for the last 10, 15, 20 years? So we've got to be careful there with I suppose, where we choose to put the on-street parking. There's a lot of difficulty, a lot of challenges with it. There's a lot of cost involved in it, but there's a lot of quick wins to be got elsewhere, as in the fast charging that Michael spoke about, for somebody to top up for 20, 30 minutes, and the apartment block, and of course retail as well, and huge car parks that are out there.
Oh, true. I mean, on that note, in Scotland, the funding for residential charge points has recently been shifted from leafy suburbia, where it's easy to put one on a driveway on the side of a house, to, for example, basement car parks for apartment blocks, where it would be somewhat more difficult. So that's where the funding is now being directed. Similarly, if you look at Norway, in Oslo, there are multi-story car parks that have big banks of dynamically load managed charge points. In other words, you know, there's more sockets than there is available power supply, so they kind of juggle electrons between the cars. But the point is that during the day, those are made available for commuters, and then overnight they're made available at a discounted rate to local residents, as long as they clear their cars out of the way by, say, 8 o'clock the next morning for the commuters coming in. So there are ways and means about it that don't necessarily touch upon council land. And as well as that, actually, there was a really interesting episode of Fully Charged that I just watched this morning, where they were covering the topic of charging without having a driveway, and they mentioned the likes of Co-Charger, where, as you mentioned, the Republic of Ireland has a lot of off-street parking. So if you have a driveway and have a charge point, you can put that on Co-Charger, and then local residents who don't have a driveway can book your charge point at a convenient time and then pay you for the electricity used. So that's another option. And then you've got the likes of the charge bridge by Nodum, so it looks a bit like a downpipe on the front of your house, and then it extends the cable high above the pavement, a good sort of couple of meters above the pavement, and then drops it at your car. And that means, again, you know, that the pavement doesn't get dug up, the local authority doesn't need to be involved. And then you've got things like urban electric, Trojan Energy, connected curb. These are all very discreet on street. Some of them are kind of pop-up charge points as well that aren't actually there until they're in use. And even then it's a minimum footprint. So hopefully there'll be quite a lot of options for various local authorities, for ESB Networks and for ZEVI to have a look at that can resolve this problem for on-street charging. Some of them don't even need the parking spaces to be marked for EVs only. So yeah, hopefully some food for thought there. But I appreciate that we've got a few questions that have come in from the audience. John Murphy's got a couple of really good ones. First one I think will be for Paul M and for Michael as well. So who will manage the faster network chargers, and will we need another charge card to add to the growing number of apps or cards? I suppose the answer is that will be determined after the tender, but there will be contactless payment as well, I presume.
There will be. The plan is there will be contactless payment on all of our chargers. And who will manage them? We basically will be going with a design, build, operate, maintain contract. So the successful tenderer will be the person envisaged now at this point in time that will be managing them for an agreed period of time. So they'll be managing and operating and maintaining them chargers.
And a kind of follow on from that is, will there be, again from John, will there be a kind of user requirements type consideration for the chargers, taking into account that there is no standard for location of charge port on cars, so basically, bearing in mind that you've got the likes of the Nissan Leaf that's a front feeder, the Tesla Model 3 that's rear left, and then I think it's the Volkswagen range is rear right. So we've already seen with Tesla superchargers that have been opened up to non-Teslas that other EVs unintentionally block the adjacent supercharger bay, which means they're effectively taking up two chargers instead of one. Will that kind of consideration of the layout of the charger and the cable length, is that all clearly stated within the tender for the faster project to make sure that everyone can use it without unintentionally?
On that, at the moment we're just in the process of procuring our design consultants, so that'll be all considerations. But what we are looking to do is have these chargers and the car parking spaces you're parked at designed in accordance with universal design principles. So all of them different considerations, insofar as you can, with constraints of the site that you're at, taken into account. So we are going to try and get these universally designed in so much as we can.
Excellent. That's really good to hear. I've accidentally clicked, Mohammed, you did have a question as well, which I'll save to the end because it's more kind of battery electric chemistry. I've accidentally said that one was answered when I meant to click John's. So let's see, we've got quite a few good questions coming in. Is there a comprehensive up-to-date list for Ireland charge points with availability and capacity that can be searched easily while on the road? So I suppose that ZapMap and PlugShare come to mind. Are there any other local ones, Geraldine and Roland, with regards to being able to find local charge points on your
route planner, of course, and of course some of the providers have also there, particularly those that can do the roaming, right? EasyGo has as well the ability to have a multitude of different charge points included into their app. So yeah, I mean, there's quite a few.
Excellent.
Yeah,
good.
you're probably always as well to check as many as you can, because there's a few missing on all of them. So I think if, when you are planning a route, you're better off trying a few apps rather than just relying on one.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, I certainly find that ZapMap works very well, but as you say, it's good to have the choice as well, because sometimes, especially if it's a kind of almost a social network in a way where it's up to users to update the latest information, sometimes it's worth kind of cross-referencing. Our work's ongoing to integrate charging across different providers to enable users to have access with only one app or service. Now, I'm aware that certainly there's the likes of Bonnet and Octopus Electric. It was Electric Juice, it's now Electric Universe, but these are more kind of Bonnet's not just UK, is it? It's kind of pan-European. What other kind of app, sort of one app and one card wonders have we got, certainly in the Republic of Ireland?
I think Bonnet pulled out of Ireland from what I heard.
Oh dear.
I was about to say the exact same thing as Roland. Bonnet opted out of the Irish market recently enough. The two that I personally use, and I've used them as far as Slovenia and back, are ChargeMap and the Shell Recharge cards, which generally speaking give good coverage. The ESB Ecars network is on both, so it's a good one for all functional card that I can keep in the glove box in case my Ecars card goes missing.
Well, that sounds great. And on that note, Chris, is EasyGo on those cards as well then?
Yeah,
are you also on?
Yeah, actually, EasyGo, we're the only ones that actually offer charging on EasyGo, ESB, and Ionity networks. Through, you know, we offer card or key fob or the app as well. Plus, we offer on the app, we offer live status of the charge points on all of those networks as well. So yeah, it's something that, you know, Geraldine alluded to it there. It can be very difficult to find the charge points, even though you know, we operate EasyGo and we've got a hell of a lot of charge points feeding into our data and onto our app. I still use other apps to try and find where there are charge points at times, or even ring hotels in advance to see if they've got charge points there, depending on the location where it is. So again, I don't know what the proper full solution is going to be. I think in the long term, the car owners are going to win out, because I think that's going to all land on the car map and starting and stopping charging through your car rather than through an app is really the way it's going to go. But I think that's a number of years away yet.
Good to know. Actually, Shane's just kind of snuck in on the chat and asked, does EasyGo have access to UK/European chargers, presumably through your own app?
Yeah, we're actually doing it at the moment. So there's access to the UK, to Northern Ireland through the EasyGo app. But we are actually working on interoperability across UK and Europe at the minute. It's going to be early next year when that's live, but it will be there.
Superb. And actually, John kind of alludes that, he kind of continues that question, if you wish, because, you know, why can't we have a single European app/card that works with all charge point providers, but mandated by law? I mean, my first answer to that would be that one would argue, with contactless credit card readers coming to fast chargers near you in the very near future, if they're not already there, that your contactless credit card will effectively be that solution. But is anyone aware of any kind of European legislation about roaming for charging infrastructure? I think we're all kind of in the same boat as that one. It's like it may come eventually, but it's not being pushed as actively as other aspects of charging infrastructure. But yeah, I suppose, would anyone see any issues with a contactless credit card being that kind of one card fits all networks from an end user perspective? Again, one for Geraldine and one for Roland. If we go Geraldine first.
Offhand, no. I mean, I can see nothing but benefits from it, to be honest. So, and certainly if you want to travel, and then, you know, it makes more sense. So no, initially I can't see any issues with it.
No,
yeah,
same here.
Certainly. Yeah, excellent. Someone has asked if there's any updates on Zevi. Unfortunately, Zevi couldn't make it along, so we can't really find out. Has anyone heard any kind of rumors on the grapevine? No. So unfortunately, that's going to be a fairly quick answer to that one. But
that's what we do know. They have started, I say that, consultation workshops with the different players in the EV world. So that just started yesterday. Of course, the team and so on are already set up. So of course, they're doing already a lot of work behind the scenes. But yeah, I do think it would be worthwhile, maybe for Faster at some point, to have a dedicated session on Zevi.
We are on that one of the working groups with Zevi.
Amazing. So yeah, basically updates are coming soon. It is all being set up, and it's got very important stakeholders involved. So yeah, very promising. Last of the questions that the panelists who are here could answer from Dermot Farrell. If a 150 kilowatt or 50 kilowatt DC charger does not deliver the advertised speed to the car, should the price not be reduced to match the speed delivered? Now, this is an interesting one, because sometimes it's not the charger's fault. Sometimes it is the car that is not physically capable of taking that power. If you were to take a Honda E or a Mazda MX-30 that can only charge about 35 kilowatts tops, and take it to a charging hub where there was a 50 kilowatt charger and a 150 kilowatt charger, would you really want to reward them for using the wrong one and blocking cars that could take 150 kilowatts from getting 150 kilowatts? That's a bit of a debate within itself. But I want to get the end user perspective first, then the network perspective. So Roland, then Geraldine, what's your thoughts on this, reducing the charging tariff if the charger doesn't provide the advertised speed?
Yeah, I think the key is to educate users as to which chargers they should be using, and encourage them to do that, rather than, as you say, rewarding them for using the wrong one, because they're in limited supply. And if you're hogging a charger that you can't get the full benefit from, and yet you're stopping a car that can, no, I think more education might be needed to steer them in the right direction, to be honest.
Yeah.
And it also depends on what the state of charge of a car is, and the charging curve of each car. You know, which car can take that. You know, there's too many variables at play to you know, to drive that. So I don't think there's a way, and nor even a necessity to do that. I think it's more about education. Your car cannot take more than 50 kilowatts. So if you have the option to take the 50 kilowatts.
Yeah, and from
I
a network,
might just. Oh, sorry.
no, from a network perspective, yeah, go.
Jumping in ahead of you. I suppose interpreting the question a little bit differently, if it's with regards to a location where categorically every vehicle that ever tries to draw 150 kilowatts or anything above 50 kilowatts can't, then it's usually a case of that site is for one reason or other constrained at this point in time, but that we're working towards trying to get it unconstrained. I do know, I think we possibly have 1 or 2 locations of our existing 150 kilowatt chargers that are thus, and as far as I'm aware, and don't shoot me if I'm wrong, but email us if I am wrong, we're only charging the fast rate, so the 50 kilowatt rate at those chargers, even though they're capable, or they could be capable of delivering 150 when the connection allows.
Interesting. Actually, on a similar note, I think I heard that Ionity give you a vastly reduced tariff, or possibly a kind of free vend. I think it might be reduced if your charging power is below, I think it's like 30 kilowatts or something, in which case, yeah, it's probably the charger's fault. Like if it's a blown power module or something, then yes, you got a charge, but it took you longer than expected. So as compensation, here's money off. So there's already some networks doing that. And certainly from my perspective, if it's the charger's fault because of a blown power module, then yeah, there should be compensation to the user. If it's the car's fault because it simply can't charge that fast, or it's too cold or whatever, then yeah, there's not much that the network can do. They shouldn't be punished for something that's out with their control. But if it is within their control, then yeah, we should look at compensation. But Chris, interested to get your thoughts as well from EasyGo's perspective.
Yeah, something along the same lines. You know, if it's the vehicle, it's the vehicle. If the power is there, I suppose also keep in mind the CPO also have to pay to have that power available, and pay to have that equipment available as well. So, you know, there's still the overheads too that have to be met for having that power and capability. Agree if you know, if the charge point is broken or a charge point is not giving out the correct power, or the power that it should, well then absolutely a reduced rate, or whatever the correct tariff should be for what the charge is on the network for that type of power. As well as that, just I suppose a slightly different perspective. A lot of our charge points, some of our charge points are actually customer owned, so the customer set the price on them. So you know, there's a certain amount we can do, and we can set the price. But if the customer sets a price on a charge point, and the charge point is not delivering for power constraints on the site, well then, unfortunately, that's what the customers, or sorry, what the charge point owner has chosen to do.
No problem. And a very quick sort of 5-second one for you as well. An anonymous attendee has asked, when will EasyGo chargers be visible on other providers' apps or maps? Currently, they don't seem to be visible. I suppose it depends on the provider.
Yeah, it does. It depends on the provider, and we have a little bit of work to do internally as well to do this. But we haven't really been asked by you know, anybody major in the space to make it kind of worth their while putting the time and effort into doing it, and to making it happen. But it will happen.
Yeah, and a final, well, sort of penultimate question, actually. Andrew's got a really good one about the sheer number of chargers that are going to be required, mostly high power charger, and about sort of 17,000 AC charge points are predicted to be required within the Republic of Ireland by 2030. Is this this is critical to support the uptake of BEVs, as we know. But not everyone can afford larger car models that have bigger battery capacities, and therefore they will be more dependent on more regular charging. So is the charging industry and is ESB Networks, again, I would have loved to have directed this one to Brian, So from a networks perspective and a charging network perspective, are you capable of providing 250 high power chargers every year up to 2030 to keep pace with demand? So we'll go Paul first, since I think you can almost talk for both parties.
Sure. I mean, look, I suppose looking at the kind of the medium term for Ecars, our ambition is to, and I'm saying this very, provisionally, is double the size of our network. The key to that is and the key point to emphasize is, when I say double, I mean double the charge points. That may mean seeing significant upgrade of AC chargers that are currently just 22 kilowatt longer stay chargers to 50 kilowatt rapids or above. The ambition we have is to continue the growth, continue the expansion, build on what we've already got. From a practical perspective, I think the notion of, and we've seen different ideas of numbers of DC chargers and AC chargers that may be needed that are hypothetical on paper. The key here is to continue the momentum of rollout of infrastructure to match and stay ahead of the uptake, to the point where the confidence is there for the non-EV drivers, to the doubters who don't think that it makes sense to make the switch. And from a practical perspective, one of the challenges that we as charge point operators have to continue to just battle on with is the fact that the ease with which someone can buy an EV, well, normally can buy an EV, is significantly greater than it is for a charge point operator to deploy new charging infrastructure in the locations that accommodate the acquisition of new EVs. I recently heard someone refer to the current wave of EVs in Ireland being due to COVID money. In other words, people who had saved up and did hard work from home and saved up the commute costs and have now gone electric. The decision to go electric can be done within a matter of weeks, whereas the charging infrastructure can take months and years to actually deploy and roll out. So I think setting targets to then only disappoint yourself is a little bit of a futile art. The key is to maintain momentum and just keep battling on, trying to get more charging infrastructure out there so that the confidence grows.
I think that's a fair answer. What about yourself, Chris? Are you ready for the challenge?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with Paul there. It's the same thing. It's staying ahead of the curve as much as you can, and overcoming the challenges that are there to try and get EV infrastructure in place. There's been a lot of great work happened over the last 3 to 4 years with a lot of stakeholders in trying to make this happen. And it's fantastic to meet the different people involved that are trying to drive all this forward and make it happen. And I think with the numbers of people who have got involved in the last 3 years, as opposed to before that, I think a lot of it was I think it was just the councils and other stakeholders just putting words to it and saying, yeah, we'll make it happen. But it's only the last 3 years we're starting to see the detail come into it and people actually making it happen. So going back to an analogy Paul had earlier, and I use it myself for the charging infrastructure, it is a bit like an iceberg as well. It's there's so much of the work being done underneath, and it's not until a charge point sits in the ground that you actually see the tip of that iceberg. And even just looking at our own business, from the charge points that you can see sitting out there of what we've got on the network, and to tell you that we're going to have over 100 charge points, new DC charge sites in line for the next year. That's been in planning for 2 years now. So there's 2 years of hard work, and we know that those charge points are going to start landing very, very quickly. So with all of that happening, and with other CPOs coming into the market, and with other work that ESB Ecars are doing, we do think that yes, we can stay ahead of the curve, and just to continue growing with it.
Excellent. And I'm aware, obviously, that as is tradition, we've massively overrun on time, but there's still so many attendees here. It's obviously, there's a huge deal of engagement with this very pressing topic, and thank you to all panelists as well for staying on too. Final 2 questions in one, which I shall direct towards Michael and towards Paul M as well, because they're more kind of local authority / faster related. So the first one is, how will the electricity supply be handled for the FASTER project? Will it be a public tender? Will it be a separate tender? Will it be included within the tender for the charging infrastructure itself? And then finally, a really good question for Michael from Gary Crilly. So Gary doesn't have any off-street parking. He doesn't have a charger. Oh, sorry, but he does have a charger at the front of the property. Where can he find regulations on running a cable over a footpath and having to have a ramp over it to prevent a trip hazard, or basically what is allowed, what is required? And I would imagine that might change from council to council. But whereabouts could you go about finding that? So first of all, we'll go back to the FASTER electricity supply. Is that going to be separately tendered? How's that being dealt with?
The electricity supply basically will be a matter for the we have applied to the ESB. The local authorities applied to the ESB for the connection, and will pay for that connection to secure that connection. But when we go out now for design, build, operate, maintain contract, the electricity supply, who that successful tender is, charge point operator, it'll be a matter for them to do a contract separately for a supplier. So that won't be a matter for us. They may have existing contracts that they use, or that'd be likes of EasyGo or ESB Ecars might tell you, but we won't be getting involved in that end of it. To answer the second question there, I think I'm kind of going to caveat this, that I'm not aware of any legislation, and you'll say you get the same answer from every local authority, in that if you run a cable across a public footpath, then there's a risk someone could trip on it. And then if they do, it'd be a matter of whose fault it was that cable was run across the footpath. So that's why we in Louth would not give you permission to run a cable across the top of a footpath. That's why you have a road open license. So you'd be putting in for a license to get the trench under the ground, to get it dug up. And then even at that, you know, if you wouldn't get permission to put a private charger on a public footpath. So you might have your private charger inside your gate, maybe, and then you'd have a cable that you might, as you say, I don't know if I'm not familiar with this thing where you have a stand and it goes over the top. But then again, you don't, maybe a child with it sitting on their father's shoulders, like a head taken up, I don't know. But then the other option might be to have the cable through a road open license running under the ground that you can run and plug into your car. I don't know the answer to that, but I wouldn't think there's any regulations around that at the moment to give you permission to run a cable on top of the ground.
Well, you've actually alluded to the thing I was going to say to Gary, which is keep an eye on that charge bridge by Nodham that was on that fully charged episode, because it does look like the clearance is sufficiently high that even if you've got a kid on, you know, the dad's shoulders, that it shouldn't be an issue. Like, there's sufficiently high clearance, especially if you're in a 2-story house. You know, you could have it up quite high and it could just drop round and down and it wouldn't be too much of an issue. But
in Ireland, NMD does the installations of those type of units. At least
excellent.
What I've seen, there may be others, but I know
Yeah.
of NMD having done installs like that.
Oh, superb. There we go. So there's already such solutions in existence as well. That's great to see. So yeah, thank you, everyone. I'm fully aware that we've massively overrun, but all of our panelists have been absolutely brilliant, top quality stuff. It's such a shame that Brian had to drop off, because of course it was after he left that we got the really good questions regarding ESB Networks. But hopefully we've answered some of the pressing questions, not just to do with FASTER, but to do with charging infrastructure in the Republic of Ireland. Things are definitely looking up. So thank you everyone for staying with us, and thank you to Paul MacArtain, to Michael McGrath, Geraldine Herbert, Chris Kelly, Roland Krijnen, and Paul Hogan, and of course, as always, the fantastic Donal Monaghan for running things behind the scenes today. We will be back for the next webinar in a month's time. So we're going to be talking about electric fleets, what you need to know. We'll have some interesting fleet owners and some representatives from the likes of Energy Saving Trust Scotland, and we'll see if we can try and get Zevi on as well to discuss incentives that are available and the realities of running electric fleets in Scotland, Northern Ireland and Republic of Ireland. That'll be Wednesday, 9th of November at 11 a.m. So remember to register for that, and looking forward to seeing you then. Take care. See you then.